Oh, I saw this neat little chart on visual capitalists. It gives us a visual representation of global GDP. But then it made me want, think and wonder, what is GDP for those of us who don't know, and why is it really not a particularly good measure for us? Why do we still even use it? Now, so what is GDP? So, mathematically, it's consumer spending plus government outlays or government spending plus investments, gross investments, and then plus net exports. That's really what GDP, and it's supposed to measure economic growth and standard of living in a country, but it really doesn't do a very good job of that. It really doesn't. So why is that the case? Let's look into that. Well, first off, it doesn't do a very good job in dealing with well-being in terms of, you think about your physical well-being, your intellectual well-being, your emotions, spiritually, your social cues. It doesn't really measure those things. So you can be very happy, very healthy person, but GDP isn't going to capture that aspect of our lives. It also doesn't really deal with negative externalities. So let's say we're building something, we're making something, but then we have lots of negative byproducts. So we could have environmental waste, things of that nature. It could worsen our health. So you think about soft drinks and sugary drinks and things like that, where it's contributing to GDP, but it isn't helping us. It's actually making us worse off in some way. So GDP doesn't really help deal with that, or the costs associated with fixing them. In fact, a lot of the costs associated with fixing these negative externalities then subsequently increase GDP because they cost money to do. It's also not particularly good at dealing with the digital economy. So if you go back 40 years, no one was using email. We were spending as a society a lot more money on snail mail with stamps and workers and all these things. We've gotten much more efficient at communications. It's faster, cheaper, easier, but actually has a negative impact on GDP and net. You also think about how we used to travel, where maybe we would engage a travel agent and we do all these things and we get paper tickets and someone had to print those and blah, blah, blah. Where now we can just go online and we can book our hotel, we can book our airplane, we can book our car, we can do everything without these extra people. Again, net impact on GDP is lower, but I would argue that our standard of living, our well-being, our efficiency, those things have improved in this digital economy, but GDP does not reflect that. Another thing that is true with GDP is it doesn't really tell you about the people underneath, right? So it gives you this big picture. Things are better, but it doesn't tell you if everything is better, or only one sector is better, or one group of society is better, or what that might be. So on average, people could be worse off, but in the aggregate, people are better off, or society. So I mean here, and we don't really know. We have a GDP number. If you think about the United States and Europe, have similar GDP growth rates, but if you look in the US in this chart, you can see that the benefits of this GDP growth rate are going to the top 1%, the people who need it less, and people in the bottom 50%, they're getting worse and worse off, even though GDP is going up, which looks like a positive, but overall it really is kind of affecting people in the opposite way you would want it to affect them. But if you go to Europe, same time period, you can see that they haven't seen this disconnect between who is benefiting from GDP growth. I think in the US, GDP is actually a little bit stronger, so it paints a better picture in the US. But if you look at the kind of the underlying data, you might argue that it's benefiting the wrong parts of society, the parts of society they don't really need to improve. The other thing is it's a number where the bigger, the better, right? So you can think of instances where bigger isn't better. You think about the financial industry getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it leading to a financial crisis. So that bigger and bigger helps GDP. We have a big financial crisis, which is a very negative consequence. You can also think about healthcare. Healthcare is becoming a larger and larger portion of our expenses, which is good for GDP, but it also is not necessarily good for society as a whole. It leads to kind of these out of control healthcare costs aren't really good for society. Like, they're very bad for society. So those are some of the problems with GDP. I'm going to follow this up with another video about ways we might improve it. Either way, I really think it's something worth measuring and good to know, but it really doesn't tell us that much about the true nature of the underlying economy and the individuals in it. Thanks so much.